Hey Dice Rollers, my name is Mr. Stump, and welcome to another episode of Tabletop Tactics with BNC Gaming. If you saw our last video, we were discussing primary scoring and why it's so important. We talked a little bit about how the primary scoring system seems to favor the player that goes second, and we also looked at which units were going to be great for your primary scoring needs. In this episode, we are going to discuss how the player who goes first can take some of the elements of primary scoring and make them work for them instead of against them. Number one, we're going to talk about strategy in general, and we're going to talk about how the player who goes first in 40K can apply and form a strategy that answers some of the questions that the game asks of them. We want to figure out how it is we can work around the fact that in turn 5, the second player has an advantage in primary scoring because they get to have that turn of movement and action before they score, and how we can overcome the way that the person who goes second gets that first opportunity to take material, because we know as the first turn player, we have to be the one that reach out and take those primary objectives at the onset. So that's what we want to cover. We're also going to talk about list building. So once we figure out a strategy for how we're going to accomplish these goals of taking the game over as the first turn player, we're going to break those goals down into specific needs that we need to have in our lists when we play Warhammer 40,000. And then we're going to actually make an action plan. So we're going to run down what you would do with that list. How would you play the game in a simple way to sort of give yourself every advantage to win from the first turn on? We mentioned how the player who goes second has two main advantages in the game of Warhammer 40,000. The first of those advantages is that in the 5th battle round, the player who goes second gets to take advantage of this rule that allows them to move, shoot, and charge before they score primary objectives. The second benefit that the player who goes second has is because of that first benefit, the player who goes first is forced to extend and grab objectives, because if they just wait until the 5th turn to do that, the player that goes second is going to be able to reach out and grab them very quickly and take over the game with that turn 5 point swing. So we want to avoid that by putting units out there and trying to score those primaries. But we notice that it's a bit of a catch-22, because when you send material out there on the first turn, then the player who goes second gets to come out and destroy that material, and they immediately start the game with a big leg up in the material game. And so we want to try to avoid both of those problems by creating some innovative solutions. So let's talk about how we're going to find solutions in 40K first. And then we will move on to specific solutions for this problem. Whenever you're playing a strategy game like Warhammer 40,000 and you're looking for a solution to a problem, the first thing that you want to do is you want to create some goals. So we're going to create goals at the onset. We're going to determine what it is that we need to do to be successful. Once you have those goals in place, we want to form a general strategy. How are we going to put those goals into practice in order to have success? Now, something we're not going to cover today, but we will in future episodes, is the concept of tactics. So think about strategy as your big picture that you create using the goals that you've established, and think about tactics like the micro decisions that you make that are informed by your macro strategy. And so this is going to be, how is it that I should use the charge phase to my advantage, the movement phase? How do I hide behind buildings and stay out of threat ranges? All of those things are going to fit into the category of tactics. That's kind of like your strategy in motion. But today we're just going to talk about the strategy, which will be informed by our goals. So let's first spend some time thinking about the goals that we have, and then we'll have an easy time making a strategy and a game plan for 40K. Last episode, we talked about several goals that we have in the primary game. We started with the fact that we need to control our home objective. We also noted that we've got to move out into the neutral zone of play, no man's land, in order to grab new objectives. And then we mentioned that we want to limit our opponent's ability to do both of those things. Let's add just 2 more goals into our list before we start formulating a strategy. So goal number 1 is we want to dictate those early game trades that we have to play into as the first turn player. So remember, we have to put things on objectives to score. The second turn player has the benefit of waiting until the 5th battle round to do that. But as the first turn player, we obviously cannot do that. So what we need to do is find a way to dictate those early trades and make them advantageous for us. The second thing is we want to make sure that the player who's going second doesn't have an opportunity to fully utilize that 5th turn point swing. And really the only way that we can do this is by making sure the game ends before the 5th battle round. Obviously, the way that the game is written, you can't prematurely end the game unless your opponent forfeits. But what we can do is we can create a strategy that practically ends the game before the 5th battle round. And so we're going to try to tilt the game in such a way that when we arrive at the 5th battle round, it really doesn't matter that the second player has that potential swing because the game's already been decided. And that kind of introduces us to a concept called tempo, which is basically the time clock for your actions in a game of Warhammer 40,000. And so we're going to look at that here in just a minute. But these are going to be our 5 goals. So just to reiterate, number 1, we want to control the home objective. Number 2, we want to gain neutral zone objectives. Number 3, we want to prevent our opponent from doing both of those things. Number 4, we want to dictate early game trades. And number 5, we want to try to end the game before we reach turn 5. Now, what I want to do is look at each one of those goals and talk about what strategic needs we have based on that goal. So, goal number 1, we want to control our home objectives. So we're going to introduce a new term for a unit. This is going to be a category of unit for this role. And this is going to be a unit that has a very specific job based on one of our goals. So this is the first example of that. What we want to do is instead of having, let's say you've got a 500 point army, and instead of having 5 completely equal 100 point units that all have the same role, we're going to introduce some roles for units that are going to determine how many points we spend on them, what they need to be able to do and what they don't need to be able to do, so on and so forth. The first role that we're going to introduce directly answers this goal of the game, and it is an objective camper. So a lot of people have different terms for this. I'm going to call it a camper, but this is basically going to be a unit with the sole, reason for inclusion being to sit on our home objective and hold it all game long. Goal number 2, we've got to get neutral zone objectives, okay? So we listed a bunch of characteristics of successful objective holders in the previous episode. And what we want to do is include several of these, and they're going to be our units that go out and take those neutral zone objectives for us so that we can score points. And they are also going to destroy our opponent's units that have taken those objectives. And so we're going to be doing some trading with them as well. Now, these units have to have speed. They need to have some form of durability. There's lots of different variations of that. And they also are going to need to be lethal in some way. They need to be able to take care of problem units that our opponent presents to us. These units kind of come in all shapes and sizes. If you have a question about what type of unit in your codex fits into the category of a primary objective player, it's pretty easy to answer. You can do a YouTube search for your faction, and people are going to have tons of tier lists and battle reports. And what you're going to notice is there will be a couple of units that everybody's including in their armies. There may be like 2 or 3 of these per codex. These are going to be those units that you're going to lean on to go out and grab primary and to destroy your opponent's material. So you're going to try to find a unit that has that perfect balance of movement, some form of toughness or durability, OC, and damage output. And for that reason, because they have to go out, they have to be lethal, they have to be durable, they have to be fast, they have to have OC, I like to call these units your workhorse units. So we're going to accomplish our second goal, gaining neutral zone objectives, by using our workhorse units. So there we've got 2 different roles that we're going to have in our army list. We've got our camper and our workhorse. All right, so we need to limit our opponent's ability to take objectives. As the game progresses, this is another thing that your workhorse units are going to do. They're not only going to capture objectives, but they're going to push your opponent off of objectives. And so these units need to go out and destroy a bunch of material, make excellent trades, and project a threat range on your opponent. So your opponent needs to be scared of these workhorse units so that when you're marching up the field to take these objectives, they're pushed back. The more you move forward, the potential threat of those units pushes your opponent back off of neutral zone objectives. Okay, so let's get to our new goals that we established today. So we want to dictate early turn trades. So here's what that means. In our last episode, I gave an example of a basic game of 40K where we had perfectly balanced forces. So it was 500 points, 5 units of breachers per side, and each side just sort of traded resources because breachers trade really well with other units like breachers. So what we want to do is we want to stagger the strength of our units. We don't want to have all of our units be a copy-paste, and you want to include some expendable units. So these are going to be really tiny units that don't cost very much, that have OC, and they're going to be your forward base of operations. So a lot of times your codex is going to have a unit that's built for this. It's going to be a really tiny unit that's really squishy, so it's not built to stick around, but it has the infiltrate keyword, or it has the scout keyword, or it has the stealth keyword, or it's super fast. And what these units are designed to do is they are designed to kick off that trade game. You're throwing something out there on a point that your opponent can't ignore, but the thing that you're throwing out there is entirely expendable. So when your opponent moves units out to kill it, it plays into your hands because hopefully they've had to move out something that they don't want to lose. And when you take that from them, you're actually getting a benefit on material. So you're trading up, basically. You trade a small thing for a big thing. So a lot of people will call the units that you use to initiate these trades a trade piece. So we've got 3 distinct roles at this point in our game plan. We've got our camper that sits on the back objective. We've got our workhorse units that are going to go out there, kill enemy units, capture midfield objectives, push into our opponent's deployment zone, all those good things. And then we've got early game trade pieces. So we're going to call these trade piece units. Okay, so finally, last goal. We need to win the material game before turn 5. So if you think about this, before your opponent has a turn 5 activation, you have 5 activations. You need to win the game in 5 activations. Now, what this looks like in practice, I've lost a lot of games, and so I can tell you what it looks like to lose a game. What it looks like is usually around turn 3 or 4, when I'm losing a game really bad, my opponent has destroyed most of my material. They've destroyed the material that matters, my workhorse units, and they're pushing into my home objective. So they're in my deployment zone, in my face. I've got nothing left to push them out, and the game's pretty much over, okay? Now, in games of Warhammer 40,000, if you've played a lot of games, you'll find that this typically happens around turn 3 or 4. So there are some armies that are built to do it in like turn 1 and 2. We'll talk about that stuff later. But for now, let's just set up a goal of reaching this point of the game by turn 3. So the reason this is really helpful is because we are giving ourselves a time clock. And if we have a time clock, we can start budgeting our turns. We can start saying, what do I need to accomplish turn 1 in order to meet my goal for turn 3? So it really helps us to have a defined game plan where we can walk into every game and just kind of double check, am I on schedule? Am I putting myself in the places that I need to be to keep on schedule? And it helps us decide how far forward to place our units when we deploy them, to how much they need to move every turn in order to be where they're supposed to be so that I can accomplish my goals by the end of the game. So we're going to try to end the game by turn 3. So let's look at our strategy. So we talked about our goals, talked around them a little bit. We put all that information together and we build a strategy. So here's our strategy. Number 1, we're going to have a very cheap unit that's going to sit on our home objective all game long. Second thing we need is we're going to have a trade piece that we're going to forward deploy, and we're going to get that on an objective to kick things off. That's going to be how we kick off the game. If our opponent doesn't come out to deal with it, we're just going to score points. Okay? So last thing we need some workhorse units. These are the scary units that your opponents heard about on the internet from your faction, and they're like, I don't want to mess with that, and we're gonna push those in their face, and we're gonna win the game with those units. All right. Another goal that we're gonna have is we are going to try to do all of that, hold our home objective, grab the midboard, push our opponent around, and by turn 3, we're gonna be in such an advantageous board state that our opponent has practically lost the game, so that in turn 4, we could probably roll it up and score the thing out. That's what we're looking to do. So we got a 3-turn clock. Let's place our strategy in the context of action items, right? So what will you do to win the game? So I'm going to phrase these in I will statements, right? So here we go. To achieve victory, turn 1, I will ensure my camper is on the home objective and place trade pieces on midboard objectives while staging my workhorse units. Turn 2, I will begin moving my workhorse units towards my opponent, removing whatever material they've placed on objectives or in the open while extending my threat range. Turn 3, I will push my workhorse units into my opponent's deployment zone in order to cripple their ability to make meaningful decisions in later rounds. So here's your 3-turn basic game plan. You can rewind that and watch it again. But this is basically, if you're playing Warhammer and somebody says, what do you want to do? You have an answer. This is your 3-turn answer for what do I want to do, right? And if everything goes perfectly, by turn 3, you're going to feel great. You're going to be like, dude, my game plan went perfect. I knew it was going to be like this. I visualized it in my head. And your opponent's left scratching their head like, why did that happen to me? How did my opponent just push me around like that? Okay? Obviously, there's going to be games where things don't work out this way, but if we at least have a plan that we can start using to get our heads in the game, to know what we want to do, then we can work with that plan in order to make sure that we're doing what we want to do. So the next thing that we want to do is create a list that we've developed from our strategy. So once we get a strategy together, then what we've got to do is make a list to ensure that we've got the material we need to see that strategy through. So I actually made a list with campers, trade pieces, and workhorse units. It's exactly 500 points as of the most recent Munitorum Field Manual. And so if you are a Space Marine player, here is your stuff you go out and buy first. You build this list, and you learn how to play the game, okay? So here's our budget list for this strategy. So the first thing is we're going to spend a little bit of points on a camper and a trade piece. So the camper and trade piece, because we're only using 500 points, we really only want to spend like 100 on both of these units. So I'm going to advise you to spend 400 of your points on your workhorse units, and then you're going to spend 100 on both of these other little side pieces. So the first one is your camper. We're going to spend 50 points on your camper. And then your trade piece, we're going to spend 50 points on that. So that leaves 400 points for a workhorse. And if you budget out your list like this, before you even look at units in your codex, if you have a general idea of your budget, I promise you it's going to help you stick with your strategy more and you're going to have more success. So when I was looking through the Space Marine codex, the first thing I did was I looked for a camper and a trade piece. And the Space Marine Codex has some awesome campers and trade pieces. Basically, I'm looking for the cheapest units I can find that fit the bill of somebody to stand on my home objective and somebody that has infiltrate that can start on a neutral zone objective. So here's what I found. The Space Marine Codex has a 55-point lieutenant in Phobos armor. So the lieutenant in Phobos armor has, I believe it has infiltrate and scout, but it's just a dude. He can hide behind a wall. He's going to go on that objective and sit there until your opponent decides they're tired of him sitting on that objective. And when they come out to kill him, then we're going to kill them. So it's awesome. Awesome trade piece. Okay, and then we need a camper. So our camper is going to be the Blade Guard Ancient. Why? Because he's 45 points. So 55 plus 45, that's 100. I'm on budget, right? I really don't care too much what the Blade Guard Ancient does, especially at this point total, because his one job is to hide behind a wall, have an OC characteristic, and hold my home objective all game. So he fits that bill. So that gets us to the fun part of our list. So the fun part of our list is the workhorse. I don't think anybody really loves to play 40k to figure out what their camper is going to be or what their exchange pieces are going to be, their trade pieces. The workhorse units is where the identity of your army is really going to kind of come into its own. So as I said, there are lots of different archetypes for your workhorse units. And when I'm playing small games, I like to lean into armor. So in the Space Marine Codex, you've got a lot of that medium infantry profile. You could spam assault intercessors, do kind of like a Black Templar approach. You could do Terminators. So you can spam that 2-up save, 3 wound, 4-up invulnerable save body, and just say, I'm going to stand on these objectives and you can come try to take it from me. But my favorite thing to do is spam Dreadnoughts. I like the armor that they have. They have a super high toughness, so your opponent's offensive weapons are going to be kind of neutralized by the toughness characteristic alone. But they usually have a pretty good save, and they move fast. They have OC, and they usually have awesome weapons, so their offensive output is crazy. So I think that when you're playing small games, Dreadnoughts are just amazing. They feel great to play. And so what I'm going to do for this 500-point list is we're going to invest in 2 Brutalis Dreadnoughts and a squad of 5 Assault Intercessors. So that is going to form the core of our army. Those are going to be our workhorse units. The Assault Intercessors are going to be kind of a flex piece. They're going to have the ability to help us be a little adaptable. So if we run into a bad matchup, the Assault Intercessors may be able to dig us out of a hole by screening or something like that. So we're going to throw them in as well. So our 500-point list is our HQ is going to be our Lieutenant in Phobos Armor, 55 points. We're going to have a Blade Guard Ancient, who's going to be our camper for 45 points. We've got Assault Intercessors for 75, Brutalis for 160, and another Brutalis for 160 for 500 points. So it's got our trade piece, our camper, and our workhorse. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to give you a really quick overview of how this list might play, how we can play out our strategy in the simplest terms possible. And I'm going to show you why it works so well by returning to our tabletop example from last episode. So let's go and take a look at that. All right, so here is our board that we set up in episode 1, and you'll see it's been updated here to create 2 actual armies for a 500-point game. So this is a very realistic setup. If you got a buddy that plays Tau and you play Space Marines and you've watched our videos and you decided that you were going to follow our template and our strategy for playing games, you roll up to meet up with your buddy, and your buddy has brought a Breacher team that has been merged with a cadre of Fireblade. So the Fireblade upgrades the Breacher team by giving everybody 1 extra shot. So it kind of takes them into overdrive. They've got 3 other vanilla Breacher teams. So they heard Breachers were awesome and they went out and bought a couple boxes of those. And they've got their Ethereal, who's going to get them command points all game. All right, so that's your buddy's plan. Smash anything that jumps onto an objective with the Breachers and get extra CP with the Ethereal. You watched the video and you made our list. And so you've got all your roles covered. You've got your trade piece with your lieutenant. So your opponent, we'll say that you drop your trade piece, opponent drops the ethereal. You're like, okay, I've got my camper. That's my Blade Guard Ancient. Put him behind a wall back here, kind of match that ethereal. And then your opponent says, okay, well, I'm going to put a Breacher unit back here, kind of hidden. Let's say you match that with your Assault Intercessors. We hide them behind a wall. So we got our Assault Intercessors there. Next, your opponent might place this other unit of Breachers. You'll say, okay, I'm going to stage my Brutalis. My Brutalis moves 8 inches. and it's going to be able to back up my lieutenant in a heartbeat. So then your opponent goes ahead and places a unit of breachers down here maybe. Okay. You're like, all right, well, I'm going to put my other brutalis down here to match that. And then they put their big guns up here across from the lieutenant because they want that lieutenant to die. And so this is your deployment for your game with your buddy. And you roll off and you go first. And the good news is you plan for this, right? So you've got a plan for going first that we talked about. And I'm going to try to end this game by turn 3 because I listened to the BNC crew. So you go first. You've got your lieutenant here. Maybe you kind of move him up here so it's harder for those breachers to get on this objective. Maybe you hide him, but he's here. We're not doing anything with him. You might move up your brutalis units into a safe location to where they can affect the game board. So, maybe there's some terrain here, but you don't really have to. The brutalis can kind of just sit here. You could move this brutalis out and see if the opponent wanted to expose a ton of stuff. But because you've already got 2 objectives, you may just stage this one as well. You might move it up a little bit, right? Get it in the game. Not really any reason to expose the assault intercessors yet. So we'll just leave those there. And we'll pass the turn to our opponent. So notice that turn 1, we've got all our goals met. We've got our staging unit here. We've got our trade piece in position. We've got our workhorse units ready to pounce if anything comes out to take the trade piece. And we've got our camper back here sitting still doing his job. Player 2 comes out, and let's just follow the same flow of gameplay that we showcased in the first video, right? So player 2 comes out. Let's say they move here, advance maybe, get around here, and then they move a breacher out here because they want to take all these objectives. And move these breachers up to stage. They've heard about staging, figure they got that one. And they leave the ethereal on the back objective. Now, we're not going to be using any stratagems for this example. We're not going to be using detachment rules. I'm not even going to get into the tactics, really. We're just going to talk about like a normal flow of trade in a game so you can see the benefits of the work that we've done in this episode. So let's say they just nuke our lieutenant and they're feeling great about themselves because they got that first blood. But remember, we planned on that. That's why we only spent like 45 points or 55 points on our lieutenant, because we knew this was going to happen. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the defensive profile of our brutalis to start bullying our opponent on our turn. So player 2 now has 2 objectives. Top of our turn, our primary score is going to be limited to our home objective. We don't get anything extra, right? So it's just this. But what we're going to do is we're going to use that movement profile, that 8-inch move here with the brutalis, and we can be clever here and stay off of the objective so that the breachers don't get the benefit of their ability to reroll on objectives. Or we could just go straight at them. We could go like this and just move right at these breachers. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing with this brutalis. We can stage the assault intercessors to move out onto one of these objectives as well, knowing that our opponent is probably going to be focused on destroying these bully units, right? These workhorse units that we have. So I've done the math actually on what breachers can do to a brutalis and what brutalis can do to a breacher. And we're going to go ahead and say that these brutalises both shoot into these breacher units and charge them. Brutalis units have an ability that gives them mortal wounds on a charge. Like I said, we're not doing any stratagems, but you could tank shock here for sure and do some damage. But we're basically going to come out and just smoke these breachers. So this brutalis is going to just eat up both of these breacher units with a combination of abilities, potentially strats, and its native lethality. Right. So now look at our opponent's position. They basically have to kill 2 brutalis units with 2 breacher units and an ethereal. So we've totally flipped last game's hypothetical on player two's head. What is player two going to do? Well, they're not going to be able to sit around because we're coming at them. And so they could try to pull back and maybe wait for that turn 5 thing. They could move these breachers out and try to shoot at these brutalis. Maybe they're like, you know what, I'm going to double down. I'm going to move this breacher out here, this one here, and we're going to focus fire. But if you do the math, even if this brutalis is on an objective, these breachers are not going to kill this brutalis dreadnought. It's got tough 10, 12 wounds, and a 2-up save. And breachers have a strength 6 gun that's AP -1. Rerolling wounds even is not going to do a lot for them. You've got to use quite a few more Tau tricks to make something like this work. We're going to say the breachers can't get it done. Maybe this brutalis is even like wounded if they decide to like try and go for both of them. Our brutalis dreadnought can probably even shift to the home objective at this point. We're looking great. We can annihilate these breachers, and we can even move our assault intercessors into position to get in on the game. And let's just say that between shooting, charging a new round of breachers and whatnot, we have totally destroyed all of our opponent's workhorse units. And now it's looking real grim for the Tau player. The game's pretty much decided. All of the benefits that the Tau player had from going second have been completely negated. Doesn't even matter that they've got something going on in the 5th turn for that swing because they have no material to do it with. We're going to be pushing in and taking home objective with a Brutalis. A Brutalis into an Ethereal is a pretty safe bet on the Space Marine player's part. So, that's going to get ugly. We're going to be on time with our game plan, and we're going to end up tabling this Tau player pretty easily. Okay, I hope that hypothetical kind of clarified what we're looking for out of our list and showed you how just a little bit of intention in building a strategy, building a budget for a list based on that strategy, building a list, and then playing out our strategy on the tabletop according to plan can prove to help us get some awesome results in games of Warhammer 40,000. Now, is every game you play going to play out like that? Of course not. We weren't including terrain. We weren't including any of the abilities that some of these units have. We weren't looking at stratagems that each player is probably going to use. So, okay, take it with a grain of salt. But you can see that we effectively neutralized some of those strengths that we mentioned in the last episode and set ourselves up for success and clarity on the tabletop. So I hope that was beneficial to you. I hope you learned something new. And if you're an experienced player, I hope it reminded you or reinforced some of the basics of the game. In the next episode, we're going to talk about different archetypes that you can use to achieve these same results. Because not every codex is created equal, and frankly, not every player wants to do the same thing on the tabletop. Tune in next time, and thanks for watching.